how do you maintain the diversity in your field?
Well, we treat it more like an area. We don't treat it as much like a field that you just put horses out in and forget. We really benefit all the plants that are there, and we understand that they have to reseed, they have to be given space to grow and to be able to come back the next year. So we try and gear everything on a 2-year cycle so that they can seed, so that we can cut it if we need to get rid of the plants that are maybe too much. This year we've got too much probably blackberry, that the horses will eat a fair amount of it, but we may have to cut that back. Sweet verbena, we've got probably a bit too much of that. So each year you'll get a challenge from a plant, and you'll want then to cut it back and stop it being too prolific, to benefit the ones that are growing closer to the ground. And this year we've grazed the land. We let the horses in the spring, early spring. They've grazed all the tall flowering plants right to the ground, so those flowers won't reseed this year, but the ones that are growing very close to the ground have really done well, because obviously they haven't been overshadowed by the taller ones. And this year those will reseed, so next year we may do a little bit of both, that we give both a chance, and then the year after that we'll go back to turning them out early in the spring. And it's about that really, it's about managing the whole area. We tend to cut the gorse back, but the horses will then eat it if it's lying around in the winter. And we try not to get too many thistles take over, because they will then block out the light for the small flowers that grow in with the grass. And apart from that, it kind of manages itself really. When it's this tall, they'll eat the bracken, but we tend to cut it down because we haven't got that area under control yet. You've got far too much bracken there, so we hope to cut that back and then eventually to have some sort of balance between the bracken and the grass, and they can eat it if they want to, or not, as the case may be. But yeah, this is far. There's so much food here that's proper antioxidants. It's proper food. You know, you'd buy it in a bag, but they get it here, and it looks like this really. It's just kind of weeds, but good weeds. The body has a whole set of chemicals that it releases at the start of any disease process. So if it's being overrun by bacterial infection, or if it's being overrun by oxidative stress, it will release inflammatory chemicals. And the whole art of well-being for horses, to me, is about keeping some sort of balance with that internal system between normality and what might then run into inflammation. And controlling the release of the inflammatory chemicals really, to me, is what it's all about. And you can only do that by feeding a wide variety of plant chemicals. It really is the only way to do it. This is wild geranium. They love wild geranium. Again, anti-inflammatory compounds, antimicrobial compounds, and cleavers the same. They've managed to eat all the cleavers from off the path, so that's another good one. Gastrointestinal tract, antimicrobial, good for skin. They've eaten it all, so that's all we've got left there. And then we have to be careful, if they eat all this, that we're not left with just ivy, so somehow we have to cut the ivy back and reintroduce or let this seed, and then it'll come back up to the path. So that's the conservation bit, but you're kind of managing it like you would manage your garden really, aren't you? You know, you're just looking after it. We're working with universities that are looking at screening for inflammatory chemicals, and then looking at how plants interact with those inflammatory chemicals. Plants do take longer to work, but that's the whole art of it. If you're feeding these plants anyway, they are buffering against oxidative stress, they are buffering against the onset of disease. It's been planted, if you can see the trees are in rows, so it was a field and then they've planted the trees, and if you look up, there's no daylight coming through, so what we can't do is get grass to regrow. So what we're hanging on to do is to find out how to coppice, so how to how much of the trees we can cut down or how much light we can let in, and then we'll clear some of the holly, and then we'll introduce grass to the area. So that's what we hope to do with this. But some things like the hazel will get eaten anyway. You can see they've kind of battered that down and eaten it. But hazel, any of the edible bark is good for inflammation, arthritis, joints. That's what they usually strip the bark down for. The young holly they'll eat. But at the moment, we're just looking now to develop this area into something a bit better. We're screening at the moment plants for anthelmintic, we're screening for antimicrobials, and we're doing that with plants, and we're doing that with significant funding from One World Health, who know that in time our antibiotics are just not going to work, and that we're becoming resistant to them. So most plants will have antimicrobial activity because it's the way they defend themselves. If they're sat out in a field and something comes along to eat them or to destroy them, they can't run off. They have to create chemicals to create a defence mechanism and to stay healthy themselves. So it's kind of common sense then that when we eat them or the horse eats them, it interacts with their own bodies to prevent disease processes taking over. We call them Whim Berries or wild blueberries, Vaccinium. You can see a little fruit there. These have escaped being eaten, but the ponies will just eat the whole plant. And as they eat them down, then they grow up, they renew, but they come back as kind of quite small green shoots, which are even more tastier. So these have been left a little bit, perhaps because they can't reach them so well. So they've got quite stalky. You can see where they've eaten off the top, picked off the top of them there. But they'll eat everything. They'll eat the leaves, the flowers, the fruit. They've left that one. And it's full of vitamin C, huge in antioxidants of all kinds, very strong antimicrobial, anti-obesity, good for laminitics, a real superfood. Pick some.
Your superfood bouquet.
Superfood bouquet, it is indeed. What's wonderful is that this is indestructible, so it'll come back like that. And they'll eat the whole thing. They just absolutely think this is the best food ever. And it is for us too. So it is a superfood. I guess the trick is to know how much does the plant contain and how effective is each plant to the horse. And to me, I think that's why I think the more variety you give them, the more chance you've got, and allow the horse to choose its own. The more chance you've got of making use of the chemicals in the plants that are antimicrobial. It's kind of common sense, really. So they do eat the honeysuckle when it's small shoots and it's close to the ground. They don't like it when it's climbing up the trees or too woody, but they will eat these small shoots that are attached to branches that creep on the ground. That's bluebells. We have loads of bluebells. We have a scientist that comes and takes our bluebells because they're making a medicine or trying to develop a drug from the bluebell seeds. The bluebells are poisonous, in fact, so they say for horses, but the horses don't eat them, so that's why you can see a lot of seed heads around. They don't take them, they just graze what they want amongst it and spit out the bits they don't like. There are some plants that will do more than others, and they kind of have the status of super medicinal plants, but unfortunately I think that if we're not careful we'll lose the knowledge of that. As we all depend on veterinary care more than anything else, more than good nutrition, let's say, you will have less knowledge or will rely upon the wrong knowledge, really. We've kind of lost our skill set with as far as plants go, and rather than just go everything is a super plant, it's much better to really learn what your own horse will choose to eat and why he chooses to eat it, and try and get access to some sort of information as to what the plant contains. This is how we want the whole wood to look, because you've got grass growing with the trees, and you get things like the shamrocks that they'll eat in the spring. These are being eaten. These have little white flowers. They tend to pick the flowers off for some reason. I've not looked into we've not analysed the compounds from there, but they do seem to like coming in under here and grazing all that. But you wouldn't get that if you weren't letting the light in. You wouldn't be able to get it. And again, the wild blueberries on the rocks that they love. This is their favourite patch. There's lots of different varieties of sedges, juncus, marshy grasses, heather, the blueberries. They've got everything all in one kind of area, and they'll come up here and just eat the whole lot down. They spend ages just picking out little bits and pieces that they really like. And the same down on the slope there. They'll go over the rocks and eat down there, which is fantastic, really. I think this is the best kind of spot of mixed heathland plants that we've got on the whole area. And we've still got the berries on there, the blueberries. Yeah, there they are. So they're eating them, they're not quite getting them all yet. Now they will kind of forage for everything. If you look at the grass here, you've even got bits of sorrel in there as well, alongside the blueberries. This grass is quite rough, really, but it's fairly high in sugar, so that's why they're up here eating it. And they'll graze it flat like this. It'll all come back next year, and as long as we control the gorse, which we do, we've been up cutting some of the gorse, it'll keep this patch manageable, and they'll use it as a field, really. And they'll go down there as well, which is quite rocky, so they actively seek out to climb through the rocks to get to bits of areas that they want to eat.